Grubbstown, Jackson County, Arkansas, USA. These are places where everyone knows danger seems far away, that nothing truly bad can happen there, that familiarity equals safety. Grubbs, a rural town in Jackson County, Arkansas, was one of those places. With a population of just over 300 people, it was quiet, close-knit, and predictable. Roads stretched through open farmland, traffic was scarce, and crime was almost unheard of. That sense of safety was shattered on a warm afternoon in August 2020, when 25-year-old Sydney Sutherland went out for a run and never returned. Sydney Sutherland had grown up in Grubbs, surrounded by family, tradition, and community. She was born to Maggie and Dion Sutherland and was the youngest of 3 children. Her 2 older brothers, Tyler and Sam, were fiercely protective of her, and her bond with her mother was especially close. Maggie often said Sydney was not just her daughter, but her best friend. They spoke multiple times a day, shared every detail of their lives, and did almost everything together. Those who knew Sydney described her as bright, intuitive, and deeply caring. She had a natural ability to understand people, to sense when someone was struggling, and to offer support without being asked. Her smile was unforgettable, her laugh infectious. She was outgoing, warm, and genuine, the kind of person who left a lasting impression without ever seeking attention. Sydney lived with her boyfriend of 4 years, Alex, and worked as a nurse at Harris Medical Center. Nursing suited her perfectly. It allowed her to care for others in the same quiet, selfless way she always had. Outside of work, fitness played a major role in her life. She worked out nearly every day, loved running, and often used exercise as a way to clear her mind. She also cherished time with her young nieces, who affectionately called her Aunt Sassy, a nickname that captured her playful spirit. In early August 2020, Sydney and her family took a summer trip to Destin, Florida. It was a rare pause from routine, a chance to relax and enjoy time together before returning to work and daily responsibilities. They arrived back home on August 18th, settling back into normal life. The following day, August 19th, Sydney was seen on her Ring doorbell camera unloading items from her car. She had just returned from the gym, where she had spent an hour training. Even after traveling, she wasted no time resuming her routine. Fitness was not just a hobby for Sydney, it was a part of who she was. That afternoon, she stopped by her mother Maggie's house to drop off some mail. The visit was brief but familiar. Sydney mentioned she planned to go home, bake brownies or cookies, and then go for a run. Maggie gently reminded her not to push herself too hard, noting that she had already been to the gym earlier that day. Sydney brushed it off with a smile. Running helped her think. It gave her peace. As she walked out the door, she turned back and said, "I love you. I'll talk to you later." Maggie replied, "I love you too," unaware that those words would become her final goodbye. After returning home, Sydney set up her Apple Watch and headed out for her run. She chose a familiar route near County Road 41 and State Highway 18, between Newport and Grubbs, a stretch of road she had traveled countless times. The area was rural and isolated, lined with fields, scattered homes, and long, empty roads where traffic was rare. Sometime between 2:30 and 3 p.m., a UPS driver noticed Sydney jogging along the road. He later recalled the moment clearly because it was unusual to see anyone out there. There were no other cars, no pedestrians, just Sydney running alone under the Arkansas sun. Another local resident, a farmer known as Quake, also reported seeing Sydney jogging that afternoon. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She appeared uninjured, calm, and alone. There were no signs of distress. No one was following her. Then, without warning, she disappeared. As the afternoon passed, Alex began to worry. Sydney had been gone longer than expected. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Text messages were never opened. Her Snapchat activity was completely silent. This behavior was alarming. Sydney never ignored messages and would never intentionally cause concern. Alex contacted Maggie. She hadn't heard from Sydney since their brief visit earlier that day. As evening approached, Panic set in. Sydney's phone continued to go straight to voicemail. There were no updates, no explanations, no reassurance. What began as concern quickly turned into fear. Police were notified, and a search began almost immediately. Officers, family members, and volunteers spread out along the roads and surrounding fields. Flashlights cut through the darkness as cars slowly drove back and forth, scanning ditches and tree lines. The once quiet town of Grubbs filled with sirens, search teams, and a growing sense of dread. By early the next morning, the search had expanded dramatically. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office was joined by Arkansas State Police, the Arkansas Department of Correction, U.S., Marshals, the FBI, and several neighboring law enforcement agencies. Helicopters searched from above, while hundreds of volunteers combed the ground below. Authorities began tracking pings from Sydney's phone, narrowing down her last known location to the same area where she had last been seen running. Then, a crucial discovery was made. Sydney's phone was found lying on the ground, undamaged, less than a quarter of a mile from her home. There were no obvious signs of a struggle nearby. No blood, no clear explanation. Hour after hour, hope began to fade. Sydney was petite, just 5 feet 3 inches tall, and weighing approximately 103 pounds. The realization that someone could have easily overpowered her on those empty roads was terrifying. During the search, Maggie Sutherland made a discovery that would forever change her. While crawling along the roadside, desperately scanning the ground, she spotted a small white bead. She recognized it instantly. It had come from Sydney's bracelet. In that moment, Maggie felt a truth settle in her chest, one no mother should ever have to face. Her daughter had not simply wandered off. Something terrible had happened. And as the search continued, the small town of Grubbs stood frozen in fear, unaware that the person responsible for Sydney's disappearance had already been hiding in plain sight. As the search for Sydney Sutherland entered its third day, the atmosphere in Grubbs had shifted from anxious hope to quiet dread. The longer she remained missing, the harder it became to believe in a miracle. Hundreds of volunteers continued combing the fields and back roads, while law enforcement followed every lead, no matter how small. Vigils were held at night, candles flickered along the roadsides, and prayers echoed through a town that had come to a standstill. Then, on the morning of Friday, August 21st, authorities announced they were working several promising leads. Just hours later, the search took a devastating turn. Sydney Sutherland's body was discovered buried in a shallow grave in a field not far from where she had last been seen running, the very area that had been searched repeatedly. The news sent shockwaves through Jackson County. What had begun as a missing persons case instantly became a homicide investigation. The medical examiner later determined that Sydney had died from multiple blunt force injuries. The violence inflicted upon her body confirmed what her family had feared, but could hardly accept. Sydney had been attacked, overpowered, and killed. Jackson County Sheriff David Lucas, who had known Sydney and her family personally, spoke openly about the toll the case had taken on him. He described watching Sydney grow up, attend school with his own children, and become a young woman full of promise. Now he was standing before the public, announcing that her life had been brutally taken. As investigators processed the scene, the focus quickly turned to identifying who could have committed such a crime in a town where almost everyone knew each other. The answer, when it came, was almost unthinkable. 2 days after Sydney's body was found, authorities named their suspect, 28-year-old Quake Llewellyn. The revelation stunned the community. Quake was not a stranger. He was a local, a third-generation farmer who managed thousands of acres of land. He was married and had stepchildren. His family was well known and respected, even receiving Jackson County Farm Family of the Year honors just a few years earlier. Most chilling of all, Quake had been deeply involved in the search for Sydney. He had joined search parties, participated in online groups, and even offered comfort to her family. At one point, he hugged Maggie Sutherland while expressing sympathy, the same hands that had ended her daughter's life. Maggie later recalled feeling something was wrong during that interaction. When she asked Quake directly if he had seen anything unusual, he calmly replied that Sydney was just running and that nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Though his words offered no answers, something about the exchange left Maggie unsettled. She walked away with a feeling she could not shake. Investigators soon learned that Quake himself had come forward to police, claiming he might have been the last person to see Sydney alive. Both he and his father consented to searches of their vehicles. It did not take long for officers to notice blood on the tailgate of Quake's pickup truck. Digital evidence further tightened the net around him. Data from his phone placed him in the same vicinity where Sydney's phone had been found. Her body was later located near land associated with his farm. Surveillance footage from Quake's home showed him leaving in his truck and returning sometime later, the vehicle now bearing visible damage. Faced with mounting evidence, Quake eventually confessed. He told investigators that he had been driving westbound on County Road 41 when he saw Sydney running. According to his initial claim, he said a cloud of dust obscured his vision and that he accidentally struck her with his truck. But investigators did not believe it was an accident. According to the Arkansas State Police, evidence showed that Quake had intentionally turned his vehicle around, accelerated towards Sydney, and hit her on purpose. He then abducted her, placing her in the back of his truck. Over the next period of time, he sexually assaulted her before beating her and burying her in a shallow grave in a nearby field. Quake admitted to removing her clothes and later disposing of evidence. Police recovered clothing he had worn during the crime from a laundry basket at his mother's house, including a black shirt with blonde hair attached and a pair of black and pink shorts. The full scope of the crime was horrifying. Quake Llewellyn was formally charged with capital murder, rape, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. He pleaded not guilty at first, but was deemed mentally competent to stand trial. If convicted, he faced the death penalty. As the case moved forward, disturbing allegations about Quake's past behavior began to surface. Anonymous sources described a pattern of troubling conduct, including stalking young women, peering into bedroom windows, and harming animals. While not all claims were formally introduced in court, they painted a disturbing picture of a man who had long gone unchecked. Quake's wife filed for divorce, and authorities confirmed she had no knowledge of her husband's crimes. She, too, was a victim left to grapple with the reality that the man she trusted had committed an act of unimaginable cruelty. After months of legal proceedings, prosecutors discussed a plea deal with the Sutherland family. The agreement would remove the death penalty from consideration in exchange for a guilty plea to capital murder and rape. The kidnapping and abuse of a corpse charges would be dismissed. For Sydney's family, the decision was agonizing. They wanted justice, but they also wanted closure. They wanted the case to end without years of appeals, delays, and repeated trauma. In the end, they agreed. In court, Quake Llewellyn pleaded guilty. Maggie Sutherland was given the opportunity to address him directly. She asked him to look her in the eyes as she spoke. She told him that Sydney was not his to take, that the hands he had used to hug her during the search were the same hands that had killed her daughter. She asked questions no parent should ever have to ask: whether Sydney had fought, whether she had cried, whether she had called out for her brothers. She ended her statement with words that would echo through the courtroom, that true justice would be having her daughter back, something no sentence could ever provide. Quake Llewellyn was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, the town of Grubbs began the slow process of grieving and remembrance. Sydney's funeral was attended by so many people that it was streamed live to allow everyone to say goodbye. In the months and years that followed, Sydney's legacy endured. The overpass near where she was running was renamed in her honor. Community runs called Finish Sydney's Run became an annual tradition, with participants often wearing pink, her favorite color. Scholarships were created in her name to support students pursuing careers in healthcare. The small white bead Maggie found during the search now lives on as a symbol worn close to her heart, a reminder of her daughter's life, love, and light. Sydney Sutherland went for a run on a road she had known since childhood. No one thought twice about it. And that is the most haunting truth of all: how ordinary the moment was. and how quickly everything changed. Her story is a reminder that danger does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it is already among us, hiding behind familiarity, trust, and silence. And though Sydney did not finish her run, the world continues to run for her, carrying her name, her kindness, and her memory forward, one step at a time.
If he's found guilty, I would like to know that he's behind bars for a long time. I think it would make a lot of us young women feel safe at home knowing that he's not out and about, can go into our homes.
I would like something big for it to happen to him. I think it will set an example. It'll definitely put a stamp on what we expect here in this community.
There's something mentally wrong with him, and my personal feeling would be that he would have become a serial killer if he could have, because his crimes kept getting progressively worse.
It was January 20th, 2008, a cold, quiet winter morning in Reno, Nevada. At 4 a.m., a faint recording from a nearby house camera captured the blurry silhouette of a man moving through the shadows near the University of Nevada, Reno. No one could have known that within minutes, a young woman's life would be stolen and a city would be shaken to its core. Her name was Brianna Dennison. Before the tragedy that would make national headlines, Brianna lived the life of a typical 19-year-old college student. Born and raised in Reno, she had grown up in a loving family, known for her kindness, bright smile, and a calm maturity beyond her age. Friends described her as warm, grounded, and always there for others. At the time of the incident, she was attending Santa Barbara City College, but had returned home to Reno during winter break to visit her family and reconnect with friends. Her days leading up to the crime were peaceful and ordinary, filled with gatherings, conversations, and plans for the year ahead. On the evening of January 19, 2008, Brianna decided to spend time with close friends near the UNR campus. They met at a local party, laughed, talked, and enjoyed the kind of carefree night that should have ended safely. Around 4 a.m., after her friend picked her up, Brianna chose to stay the night at a residence on Mackay Court, just across from the university. The house was familiar and filled with people she trusted. Exhausted from the long night, she lay down to sleep on the couch in the living room. The sliding glass door behind her, a detail no one thought twice about, was left unlocked. The neighborhood had always felt safe. No one inside the home could have predicted that a predator was already lurking nearby. In the months before Brianna's disappearance, multiple young women near the UNR campus had reported being attacked or assaulted during the night. Women living in the area often felt watched, as if someone was studying their routines. Police were aware of a series of sexual assaults tied to an unidentified man, but the trail had gone cold. And on that early January morning, he struck again. Sometime before dawn, an unknown man entered the house through the unlocked door. Quiet, calculated, and disturbingly confident, he approached the sleeping girl on the couch. What happened next was sudden and violent. Brianna was forcibly taken from the home without making a sound loud enough to wake anyone inside. By the time morning came, the entire house remained unaware that she had been abducted. When her friend walked into the living room hours later, the couch was empty. At first, they assumed she had stepped out. But the more they looked, the clearer it became that something was wrong. Brianna's purse was still there. Her phone. Her clothes. Everything she owned remained untouched except her blanket, which was found in the yard, partially stuck under a bush. Panic set in immediately. Her family was notified. Police were called. What began as confusion quickly erupted into fear. Brianna was not the type to wander off, and she never left without contacting someone. A missing persons report was filed that same morning, triggering a massive search operation around Reno. Detectives cordoned off the house on Mackay Court as a potential crime scene. Forensic teams began carefully examining the living room and the sliding door. They collected fibers, fingerprints, and any trace of DNA that could offer answers. Outside, dogs searched the yard and surrounding streets. Volunteers handed out flyers. Local news stations broadcast her photo citywide. And yet, there was no clue of where she had been taken. Within 24 hours, investigators discovered something crucial. A small amount of blood on the pillow where Brianna had slept. It was not hers. DNA analysis later revealed it belonged to an adult male, and to their shock, it matched DNA recovered from 2 previous sexual assault victims near the university. All 3 cases were now tied to the same unidentified offender. This revelation changed everything. Meanwhile, the search for Brianna intensified. Police combed through surveillance footage from nearby buildings, interviewed party attendees, questioned neighbors, and followed every tip. Helicopters scanned open fields. Officers searched abandoned buildings, riverbanks, and remote areas outside Reno. The city held its breath. Days turned into weeks. Family members pleaded publicly for her safe return. Candlelight vigils were held. Hundreds of volunteers joined the effort. But despite the community's determination, Brianna remained missing. Then, on February 15, 2008, nearly a month after she disappeared, a chilling discovery was made. A man walking near a desolate lot in southeast Reno noticed something on the ground beneath a stack of debris. It was the body of a young woman. Detectives arrived quickly, and with heavy hearts they confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to Brianna Dennison. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. Forensic examination showed signs of strangulation. The brutality of the crime stunned even seasoned investigators. The autopsy provided key evidence. DNA collected from her body matched the same male profile tied to the earlier assaults. The killer had finally left enough evidence for police to follow, but they still had no name, no suspect, and no clear motive. Only a DNA profile. As Brianna's loved ones grieved, the timeline of her final hours was pieced together carefully. Where she had been, who she had seen, how the offender had entered the home. Every detail became a potential clue, and investigators knew one thing for certain. The man who murdered Brianna was still out there, and he had attacked before. This marked the beginning of one of Nevada's most intense investigations, one that would eventually uncover the identity of a dangerous predator hiding in plain sight. The discovery of Brianna Dennison's body transformed the case from a missing person search into a full homicide investigation. Detectives intensified their efforts, determined to uncover the man behind the DNA profile that had now been connected to 3 violent assaults and 1 murder. The pressure was immense, not only from the public, who demanded justice, but also from the families of previous victims who hoped the nightmare would finally end. Investigators began by reconstructing Brianna's final movements. Every individual who had interacted with her during the hours leading up to her abduction was interviewed. Friends recounted the events of the party, her decision to stay overnight, and the seemingly ordinary nature of the evening. Detectives examined the sliding door, the yard, and footprints left in the soil, but rain and time had erased most of the physical traces. Still, the case now hinged on the most important lead they had: the DNA. The male profile, though unidentified, was complete and strong. Detectives cross-referenced it with every offender in Nevada's DNA database. They searched national records, looked into recently discharged military personnel, and even checked individuals with minor assault histories. But no match appeared. That meant the offender had never been arrested for a felony or had never had his DNA entered into the system. With few traditional leads available, investigators turned to the past sexual assault cases linked by DNA. They re-interviewed the victims, studied the attack patterns, and searched for consistencies in the offender's behavior. Each assault happened near the university. Each occurred late at night or early in the morning. The victims all described a man who moved with confidence and strength. The assaults were planned, deliberate, and escalating. This was not opportunistic violence. This was a predator developing a pattern. Meanwhile, police began receiving tips from the public. One tip would eventually change everything. A woman reported that her boyfriend, James Michael Biela, had recently expressed fear that police were looking for him. She also stated that he had given her a pair of women's underwear, an unsettling detail that immediately caught the attention of detectives. The woman explained that James had asked her to hold on to them, something she found strange but never connected to a crime. When detectives tested the underwear, the results were undeniable. The DNA belonged to the same man who murdered Brianna. With this breakthrough, investigators quickly built a profile on Biela. He was a 27-year-old construction worker, a former Marine, and a father. He lived in Reno and was familiar with the university area. He also had a documented history of domestic violence against his girlfriend, including controlling and aggressive behavior. The pieces were coming together. Detectives obtained a warrant to collect Biela's DNA. Officers approached him at work, and though he tried to remain calm, his demeanor showed clear signs of stress. When his DNA sample was processed, the results aligned perfectly with the profile from Brianna's case and the earlier assaults. The match was absolute. On November 25, 2008, 10 months after Brianna's disappearance, police arrested James Michael Biela for kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. During interrogation, Biela denied all involvement. He insisted he had nothing to do with Brianna, nothing to do with the prior attacks, and nothing to hide. Detectives challenged his claims with the DNA evidence, but he remained emotionless, often responding with vague statements or contradictions. When confronted about the underwear kept by his girlfriend, he became silent. His refusal to confess, however, had no impact on the mounting evidence. Prosecutors moved quickly to build a complete case file. They compiled DNA reports, witness statements, timelines, forensic maps, phone records, and behavioral analyses. Experts testified that the probability of the DNA match being coincidental was astronomically low. The link to the earlier victims showed a clear pattern of escalating violence, culminating in murder. As the trial approached, the community prepared for one of the most emotional court proceedings in Reno's history. Brianna's family, along with survivors of the previous assaults, attended every hearing. Their presence filled the courtroom with a mix of sorrow, resolve, and strength. The trial began in May 2010. Prosecutors laid out a methodical and devastating narrative. A man who stalked the university area. A man whose assaults became more aggressive. A man who entered a home while others slept. A man whose DNA marked every crime scene. A man who murdered a defenseless 19-year-old girl. The defense argued that the DNA evidence was contaminated and that circumstantial details could not prove intent. But with each witness, their arguments weakened. The scientific evidence was overwhelming. The victims' testimonies were powerful. And the timeline of Biela's movements on the night of the crime aligned with the abduction window. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict, guilty on all counts. On August 10, 2010, the judge delivered the sentence. For the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of Brianna Dennison, along with his previous assaults, James Michael Biela received the death penalty and 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Biela was transferred to Ely State Prison, where he remains on death row. For Brianna's family, the verdict brought justice but not healing. Their loss was immeasurable, and their grief remained heavy. Yet they chose to honor her memory by turning tragedy into purpose. They created the Brianna Dennison Foundation, advocating for improved safety on college campuses and pushing for faster processing of DNA evidence. Their efforts contributed to laws that reduced backlogs in forensic testing, ensuring future victims would not be overlooked. The case left a lasting impact on Nevada. It exposed vulnerabilities in campus safety, highlighted the danger of unprocessed forensic evidence, and reminded communities of the predators who sometimes hide in plain sight. But above all, it underscored the fragility of life and the profound pain of a family who lost a daughter, a sister, and a friend. Breonna Dennison's story is not just a true crime case. It is a reminder of the importance of vigilance, community awareness, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Her memory continues to inspire change, ensuring that even in tragedy, her legacy brings protection to others. On the morning of September 8, 2014, Tong Sha did not return home. For a 19-year-old international student known for her discipline, responsibility, and close connection to her family, this absence was deeply unsettling. She had classes that day. She had plans. She had never disappeared without explanation. At that moment, no one yet knew that Tong Sha was already dead. They only knew that something was terribly wrong. Tong Sha was born in Dalian, a busy coastal city in northeastern China with a population of more than 6 million people. She was the only child of Chongxiang and Yang Shu, and the bond between the three of them was exceptionally close. Tong was the center of her parents' world, their pride and their hope for the future. From a young age, she displayed remarkable promise. She was creative and artistic, yet also analytical and academically gifted. She played the piano, loved to dance, and excelled in school. Friends and family often said there was nothing she could not achieve if she truly set her mind to it. She earned a place at Dalian Yuming Senior High School, one of the most prestigious schools in the city. The school had built a reputation for producing top performers in China's highly competitive college entrance examinations, known as the Gaokao. Students who consistently excelled could sometimes gain direct admission to elite universities. Tong worked tirelessly toward this goal, but despite her efforts, she did not achieve the outcome she had hoped for. Her boyfriend at the time was admitted to a top university. Tong was not. The disappointment was crushing. Years of intense academic pressure suddenly felt meaningless, and her future seemed uncertain. At the same time, her relationship began to unravel. Faced with both personal and academic setbacks, Tong stood at a crossroads. Rather than retreat, she made a bold and life-altering decision. She chose to leave China and start over. Tong decided to move to the United States to attend Iowa State University, where she planned to study chemical engineering. It was an enormous leap for a young woman who had never lived abroad. Her parents supported her without hesitation, contributing their entire life savings, nearly $100,000, to fund her education and new life overseas. Before she could leave, Tong needed to pass an English language proficiency exam in Beijing in July 2011. It was there that she met Xiangnan Li. Li was also studying English and preparing to move to the United States, where he planned to attend the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. The two connected quickly, bonded by shared uncertainty and the excitement of starting new lives in a foreign country. Tong viewed the relationship as casual. Li, however, appeared to feel something deeper. When Tong's parents met him, they found him quiet, shy, and polite, yet they sensed the pair were not well suited for each other. Others shared the same concern. Tong reassured everyone that the relationship was not serious and that there was nothing to worry about. In September 2012, Tong arrived in Iowa and quickly flourished. From the beginning, she maintained high academic standards while fully immersing herself in college life. When she was not studying, she danced, socialized at parties, and taught Chinese to fellow students. She made friends easily and grew especially close to her roommates. Although she was the oldest of the group, they affectionately called her Little Sister, because she was the smallest, standing just over 5 feet tall. Her best friend and roommate, Jean, later described Tong as exceptionally intelligent. She was the type of student who constantly worried she was not studying enough, yet still earned straight A's and ranked at the top of her class. Tong appeared confident, driven, and full of promise. Despite the distance between them, Tong and Li continued communicating. Then, unexpectedly, Li decided to transfer to Iowa State University as well. Without housing and before his classes began, he temporarily moved in with Tong and her roommates. What began as a favor soon became deeply uncomfortable. Lee kept to himself, rarely socialized, contributed nothing to household chores, and left messes throughout the apartment. More troubling was his behavior toward Tong. He did not like her spending time away from him. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with, and when she would return. Tong insisted they were not officially a couple, but privately she was growing increasingly uncomfortable. His possessiveness weighed on her. Eventually, Lee moved into his own apartment and officially enrolled in classes, bringing relief to Tong's roommates. But the tension did not end there. Further conflict arose when Lee gave police Tong's address as his own during a traffic stop. This infuriated Tong and her roommates, who no longer wanted any association with him. By this point, even hearing his name caused frustration. Tong confided in friends that she wanted to end the relationship properly and move on. She was emotionally distancing herself and beginning to envision a future without Lee. On September 3, 2014, she spoke to a friend she had recently grown close to. Romantic feelings were beginning to develop between them. Tong admitted that her relationship with Lee had made her unhappy for a long time and that she intended to leave him. However, she and Lee had already planned a weekend trip together to a motel. Tong told her friend she would go, resolve things afterward, and then move on with her life. 4 days later, on the night of September 7th, Tong's father sent her a message asking whether she had replaced a pair of glasses she had recently lost. Her response was brief and unusually cold. She said she had borrowed a pair from a friend. When her father asked to video call, she declined, saying she was too busy. The exchange left him unsettled. That same night, at 1:30 a.m., one of Tong's roommates received a strange text message sent from Lee's phone. The message claimed that Tong was still in Iowa City, that Lee had lost his phone, and that Tong was traveling to Minnesota to visit friends. It added that the phone battery was running out. Nothing about the message felt right. When Monday morning arrived, Tong still had not returned home. Concern quickly turned into fear. Days passed without any contact. Her phone was silent. Her social media accounts were inactive. Friends reached out to contacts in Minnesota, but no one had seen her. On September 18th, with dread settling heavily in their hearts, Tong's roommates reported her missing. Police initially considered the possibility that Tong had returned to China, something not uncommon among international students. But there was no evidence she had left the country and no proof she had traveled to Minnesota. Tong Sha had vanished without a trace, and whatever had happened to her was only just beginning to unfold. As the days passed with no sign of Tong Sha, fear spread rapidly through Iowa State University and the surrounding community. Her disappearance rattled students and faculty alike. Flyers were printed and shared across campus. Social media posts circulated, pleading for information. Everyone who knew Tong struggled to reconcile the image of a bright, disciplined young woman with the idea that she could simply vanish. Police began retracing Tong's last known movements. Credit card transactions and witness statements soon revealed that on September 5, 2014, Tong and Xiangnan Li had checked into the Budget Inn and Suites in Iowa City, room 218, just as they had planned. The motel owner, Ken, confirmed the check-in. He recognized the couple, explaining that they had stayed there before and that their visit appeared entirely normal. The following day, Ken recalled seeing Tong walking alone through the motel lobby. CCTV footage later showed Tong and Lee stopping at a nearby gas station to buy bottled water. There were no signs of distress, no indication that anyone had followed them, and nothing to suggest violence, at least not yet. On the morning of September 7th, Ken noticed something unusual. Tong's car was gone, and the room appeared empty. The couple seemed to have left early, yet no one had officially checked out. While early departures were not unheard of, Ken found it strange. In previous visits, Tong and Lee were often late checking out and had to be reminded to leave. Even more frustrating for investigators was a technical glitch in the motel's surveillance system, which meant there was no footage of the couple checking out. Detectives then searched Tong's apartment. Inside, they found a receipt for a car she had recently purchased, which provided them with the vehicle's make, model, and license plate number. That information was sent to law enforcement agencies across the region in hopes of locating the car. Search warrants were also obtained for both Lee's apartment and the motel room. Lee's apartment was in disarray. Belongings were scattered everywhere, and it appeared as though he had packed some items hastily. At the motel, investigators noticed small, dark-colored splatter marks on the headboard and walls. However, without clear evidence of a crime and knowing that other guests had stayed in the room afterward, it took time to obtain authorization to collect forensic samples. Attention then turned to Lee's phone records. If, as claimed in the strange text messages, Tong had his phone, it could provide crucial location data, but the records told a very different story. Between September 5th and September 8th, several calls were made to a man named Paul, mostly from Ames, Iowa, not Minnesota. One call stood out above all others. It had been made from China. The message sent to Tong's friends claiming she was in Iowa City had actually been sent while the phone was in Chicago. Investigators soon confirmed that Lee had traveled to Chicago for a connecting flight, which was delayed. Instead of waiting, he flew to Los Angeles and then boarded a flight to China. He had never lost his phone. Tong never had it. Paul later spoke with police, explaining that Lee had contacted him asking for help purchasing a plane ticket to China. Lee claimed it was an emergency, but offered no details. When Paul asked if he needed a return ticket, Lee said no. By this point, investigators were convinced that Tong had been the victim of a serious crime. Xiangnan Li was officially named a person of interest. On September 26, 2014, a breakthrough came. Police received a report that Tong's 1997 Toyota Camry had been located. The car was parked beneath a tree near an apartment complex just outside Iowa City. One of the nearby apartments belonged to Lee. Residents said the car had been sitting there for weeks. They also reported a strong, foul odor coming from it. Officers waited for a warrant to open the vehicle, but the smell told them what they were likely to find. When the trunk was finally opened, the odor intensified. Inside was a suitcase. Within that suitcase lay the badly decomposed body of Tong Sha. A dumbbell was also found inside, along with a blood-stained towel wrapped around her head. Although formal identification required forensic testing, investigators already knew. Tong Sha had been found in the trunk of her own car. An autopsy later confirmed the cause of death as asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. Investigators believed Tong had survived the initial beating, only to suffocate after being forced into the suitcase. Her smashed phone was found on the driver's seat, and travel documents belonging to Lee were discovered in the car. Armed with this evidence, police returned to the motel with a full forensic team. The bloody towel used to wrap Tong's head was traced back to the motel room. Luminol testing revealed traces of blood on furniture and other surfaces. Surveillance footage from nearby stores showed Lee purchasing the suitcase from TJ Maxx, spending time comparing sizes. He was also seen buying 2 dumbbells from Walmart, one of which was later found in the suitcase. These discoveries pointed to chilling premeditation. Further investigation uncovered a critical detail. On September 3rd, Tong had confided in a friend about her intention to leave Lee and move on. Unbeknownst to her, Lee had accidentally overheard the conversation after calling her phone and remaining on the line for nearly 30 minutes. The call lasted over 3 hours. Shortly afterward, Lee posted a cryptic message on social media that read, F*** my life. Detectives now understood the motive. After overhearing Tong's plans to leave him, Lee flew into a rage and began planning her murder. On September 5th, the couple checked into the motel. On September 6th, Lee purchased the suitcase and dumbbells and booked a one-way ticket to China. On September 7th, Tong was killed. Lee then returned to his apartment to gather belongings, debated disposing of the suitcase in the Skunk River, where phone data placed him between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock a.m. and ultimately abandoned the body in the trunk of the car when he realized the river was too shallow. He spent the following hours impersonating Tong through text messages to buy himself time before fleeing the country. In March 2015, an arrest warrant was issued for Li, but by then he was already in China, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. The situation seemed hopeless. In May 2015, Li surrendered to police in Wenzhou. He was formally charged with intentional homicide and later pleaded guilty. He claimed the killing was impulsive and in self-defense, but the overwhelming evidence told a different story. In June 2016, Li was sentenced to life in prison. Under Chinese law, the sentence could later be reduced, but for Tong's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice. The loss devastated Tong's parents. Her father's health deteriorated, and he was unable to travel to the United States to bring his daughter's ashes home. Their grief was immeasurable. Tong Sha's case became a landmark example of international cooperation in criminal justice. But beyond legal precedents and diplomatic negotiations, it was the story of a young woman with limitless potential, cut short by jealousy, control, and violence. Tong's friends remember her as warm, intelligent, and full of life. To this day, her roommate Jean carries a prayer book Tong once gave her, a reminder that even in the darkest tragedies, the memory of the victim endures. Tong Sha did not walk alone in life, and she will not be forgotten in death. Public pressure in China grew intense. Tong's case dominated headlines. Social media users shared Li's photo, and the hashtag #FindLi trended nationwide. Chinese authorities eventually cooperated with U.S. investigators, agreeing to locate and arrest him.
111, what's your emergency? Yeah, I've got someone who's missing, a worker of mine that we can't seem to find. Missing from where? I'm the manager of the Oak Park Apartments, and this worker actually happens to be my sister-in-law. She's 19. When was the last time anybody saw her? Around 10:30.
She went out for 5 minutes to run an errand and never came back. Her slippers were torn. Her phone was still in the car. Someone screamed, then nothing. For years, police had no body, no suspect, no answers, until one arrest in another state exposed a predator hiding in plain sight. Don't blink. This is the case that shocked all of Oregon. Brooke Wilberger was a young woman known for her gentleness, intelligence, and quiet strength. Raised in Oregon as the fifth of 6 children, she grew up in a close and loving family that valued faith, hard work, and compassion. From a young age, Brooke faced challenges that shaped who she would become. She struggled significantly with speech as a child, not fully speaking until she was 4 years old. Rather than discouraging her, this experience inspired a lifelong dream. Brooke wanted to become a speech pathologist, determined to help others find their voices and confidence. Academically gifted and athletically inclined, Brooke excelled in school and loved sports such as basketball, snowboarding, and running. She was soft-spoken, but those close to her said she never hesitated to speak up if something felt wrong. Her faith was central to her life. As a devoted member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Brooke carried herself with strong values and a clear vision for her future. At 16, she began dating Justin, a longtime childhood friend who shared her beliefs. Their relationship was steady and serious, grounded in mutual respect. When Justin left on a 2-year church mission to Venezuela, Brooke enrolled at Brigham Young University in Utah, choosing the school in part because it offered one of the nation's strongest speech pathology programs. Her freshman year went smoothly. She adjusted well to college life, formed friendships, and remained focused on her goals. When summer arrived, Brooke returned home to Oregon, eager to work and save money before heading back to school. Her older sister Stephanie, who managed the Oak Park Apartments in Corvallis with her husband, helped her secure a summer job there. It seemed like the ideal situation. Brooke would perform light maintenance work around the complex and stay with Stephanie for a few days at a time. She was surrounded by family, in a familiar environment, doing safe and straightforward work. On the morning of May 24th, Brooke reported for her shift as usual. One of her tasks that day was cleaning outdoor light fixtures around the apartment complex. At around 10 a.m., Stephanie glanced out her window and saw Brooke filling a bucket with water. She was dressed casually, wearing flip-flops, preparing to clean the lights. The sisters had made plans to have lunch together later that afternoon. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As the morning passed, Stephanie became busy preparing lunch for her children and lost track of time. When she finally looked at the clock, it was already past 1 p.m. Brooke had not returned. At first, Stephanie was unconcerned. Brooke might have been delayed, speaking with a tenant or finishing a task. Trying to keep things light, she gathered her children and jokingly suggested they go look for her. As Stephanie walked through the complex, her sense of ease quickly dissolved. Near one of the lampposts, she saw Brooke's cleaning supplies still sitting there. The bucket of water remained untouched. Then she noticed Brooke's flip-flops on the ground nearby. They were torn, muddy, and damaged. The straps appeared ripped, as though Brooke had been pulled out of them while trying to stay where she was. The sight immediately filled Stephanie with dread. She called her husband, and together they searched the area more thoroughly. When they checked Brooke's car parked nearby, another alarming detail emerged. Brooke's phone, wallet, and bag were all inside her locked vehicle. She had not taken any of her belongings with her. By around 3 p.m., it became clear that this was not a misunderstanding or a delay. Stephanie called 911.
What's your emergency? Yeah, I've got someone who's missing, a worker of mine that we can't seem to find. Missing from where? I'm the manager of the Oak Park Apartments, and this worker actually happens to be my sister-in-law. She's 19. When was the last time anybody saw her? Around 10:30.
Police responded immediately. Lieutenant Ron Noble later explained that while adults are generally free to come and go, this case stood out. Brooke was responsible, reliable, and not the type of person to disappear without telling anyone where she was going, especially not during a work shift. Officers quickly began canvassing the apartment complex. Several residents reported hearing a scream around 10:30 a.m., but no one had witnessed anything suspicious. Whatever happened to Brooke Wilberger had happened quickly, in broad daylight, without leaving behind obvious witnesses. Within hours, the case escalated. Police went door to door, interviewing residents, while other investigators began reviewing registered sex offenders in the area, nearly 2,000 individuals. The FBI was called in, and search efforts expanded rapidly. Volunteers combed through fields, wooded areas, and nearby roads. Brooke's boyfriend Justin was contacted overseas and quickly ruled out. He was confirmed to be in Venezuela, and the news of Brooke's disappearance devastated him. As days turned into weeks, fear spread through Corvallis. Parents worried for their children. Students became hyper-aware of their surroundings. The community was gripped by one terrifying question: if someone could abduct a young woman in the middle of a safe apartment complex in daylight, who would be next? Despite massive search efforts and national attention, Brooke Wilberger did not return home. And with each passing day, the hope of finding her alive slowly began to fade. As weeks turned into months with no sign of Brooke Wilberger, the investigation began to shift from urgent rescue to long-term pursuit. Search parties slowly thinned, and leads that once felt promising faded into silence. Statistically, investigators knew the odds were worsening with every passing day. Yet the case refused to go cold. Too many details suggested violence, and too many people believed that whoever took Brooke was still out there. Early in the investigation, police began receiving reports that would later prove crucial. Several witnesses described seeing a dark green minivan, possibly a late 1990 S model, driving erratically around Corvallis and near Oregon State University on the day Brooke vanished. One man had even called 911 to report the vehicle for dangerous speeding. A university employee recalled seeing a green minivan with out-of-state plates parked on campus, where the driver appeared to be harassing a female student. Another student reported that a similar vehicle pulled in front of her, the driver asking for directions before opening the back door, causing her to flee in fear. At the time, investigators could not identify the driver or confirm whether the vehicle was connected to Brooke's disappearance. Still, the image of the minivan lingered in the background of the case, a shadow without a name. Months passed. Then, in November 2004, more than 1,400 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a call came in that would change everything. A woman named Dara was driving with her daughters when they saw a young woman running naked and hysterical across a busy road. She was screaming, terrified, and desperately trying to pull open the doors of a nearby restaurant. Dara stopped immediately and helped the woman into her car, then called 911. The woman was a 22-year-old Russian foreign exchange student. Through tears, she explained that she had been grabbed from behind while walking, a knife pressed to her throat. Her attacker, a tall, broad white man with a shaved head and beard, dragged her into his car, sexually assaulted her, and tied her up using her own shoelaces. He then drove into an apartment complex and left the car to go inside a nearby apartment. Miraculously, the woman managed to free herself and run for her life. She provided police with a detailed description of the attacker and his vehicle, a distinctive car with unusual interior details that officers could not ignore. Within hours, police identified a suspect, Joel Patrick Courtney, a 38-year-old married father of 3 living in a suburb of Albuquerque. Joel Courtney was arrested just blocks away. Inside his vehicle, officers found a knife and a crack pipe. A background check revealed that Courtney was a convicted sex offender with a criminal history dating back to the early 1990s, including sexual assault, drug offenses, and repeated violence. He had lived all over the country from Alaska to Florida to Oregon, drifting from job to job, leaving destruction behind him. As detectives in New Mexico built their case, one investigator noticed disturbing parallels to the Brooke Wilberger disappearance. The victims shared similar physical features. The method of attack, sudden abduction, knife threat, sexual assault, was eerily familiar. The timing, too, raised alarms. When Oregon authorities were contacted, they made a chilling discovery. Joel Courtney had been in Corvallis, Oregon, on the very day Brooke vanished, visiting family. The dark green minivan suddenly had a driver. Investigators soon located the vehicle Courtney had been using in Oregon. It was, unmistakably, a dark green minivan, the same type described by multiple witnesses months earlier. The van was seized and transported for extensive forensic testing. It was completely dismantled, every surface swabbed, every fiber examined. The results would take months. When they finally came back, they were devastating. Brooke Wilberger's DNA was inside the van. Blonde hairs matching Brooke were found inside one of Courtney's bags. The evidence also confirmed that Brooke had been sexually assaulted. Although Brooke's body had not yet been found, authorities publicly announced what her family had long feared. Brooke Wilberger was presumed dead. In July 2005, a Benton County grand jury returned a sweeping indictment. Joel Patrick Courtney was charged with 19 counts, including multiple counts of aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping, first-degree rape, sexual abuse, and sodomy. Under Oregon law, the charges carried the possibility of the death penalty. However, Courtney was already facing prosecution in New Mexico for the abduction and rape of the exchange student. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Throughout his sentencing, Courtney showed open contempt for the court, mocking the process and insulting the judge. His behavior only strengthened investigators' resolve. Behind bars, Courtney played a cruel game. He denied knowing Brooke, denied harming her, yet hinted that authorities would never hold him accountable. To his own mother, he reportedly said, "They'll never prove it." He knew exactly what he had the location of Brooke's remains, and he weaponized that knowledge. Years passed. By 2010, Courtney was facing trial in Oregon and the very real possibility of execution. Prosecutors made a deal. If Courtney would lead them to Brooke Wilberger's body, the death penalty would be taken off the table. For months, he refused. Only after suffering repeated assaults in prison and being denied medication did Courtney finally agree. In exchange for serving his life sentence without parole and avoiding execution, he would tell investigators where Brooke was. More than 5 years after she disappeared, Courtney led authorities to a remote wooded area in Benton County, approximately 12 miles west of where Brooke had been abducted. Her remains were found hidden beneath a fallen tree on private property, deliberately concealed. Brooke was identified through dental records and by a small but heartbreaking detail: a silver watch her mother, Cammie Wilberger, had given her for Christmas. In court, Courtney finally admitted what he had done. He confessed that on the morning of May 24, 2004, he had been driving around Corvallis looking for a young woman. He admitted attempting to abduct 2 other female students earlier that day. When he saw Brooke alone, cleaning light fixtures, he pretended to be a delivery driver to lure her closer. He abducted her at knife point, bound her with tape, sexually assaulted her, and drove her into the woods. He kept her alive overnight before beating her to death. He claimed he had not planned to kill her until she fought back. Joel Patrick Courtney was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Wilberger family, justice did not bring peace, but it brought truth. Brooke's mother spoke of gratitude that her daughter had finally been found, that she could be brought home. The family chose dignity over hatred, even expressing relief that Courtney would never hurt another woman. The loss, however, remains immeasurable. Brooke went from washing streetlights and planning lunch with her sister to entering a nightmare in a matter of minutes. Her story became a defining chapter in Corvallis, not one of fear, but of remembrance. Brooke Wilberger is remembered not for how she died, but for who she was: a young woman with faith, kindness, and a future that should have been long and full. Her case stands as a reminder of how quickly ordinary moments can turn irreversible, and why vigilance, community, and truth matter.
911, what's the location of the emergency?
My daughter is missing.
What's your address, ma'am?
She's gone. We can't find her anywhere. I've called all her friends.
How old is she?
11.
Okay, what's her name, ma'am?
Carlie, Carlie.
And last name?
Brucia, Brucia.
On February 1st, 2004, much of the United States was celebrating. Nearly 90 million people were watching the Super Bowl as the New England Patriots defeated the Carolina Panthers in one of the most watched games in history. Homes were filled with noise and excitement, and streets across the country were noticeably quieter than usual. But in Sarasota, Florida, that Sunday evening would mark the beginning of a nightmare. At 6:21 p.m., a surveillance camera positioned behind a car wash on Bee Ridge Road recorded a brief encounter that would later become one of the most haunting images in modern American crime history. The footage showed a young girl walking alone, wearing a red shirt, blue jeans, and a pink backpack. Moments later, a man stepped into view, spoke to her briefly, then took her by the arm and led her away. The girl was Carlie Brucia. She was 11 years old. Within days, the footage would be broadcast nationwide, freezing a few terrifying seconds in time. But before the video ever reached the public, Carlie had already vanished. Carlie Jane Brucia was born on March 16, 1992, in Long Island, New York, to Joseph Brucia and Susan Brucia. After her parents divorced, Carlie moved with her mother to Sarasota, where she would grow up surrounded by family and friends. She continued to visit relatives in New York during school breaks and holidays, especially enjoying Christmas with her extended family. Susan later remarried Stephen Spinn, and together they raised Carlie and her younger brother. Those who knew Carlie described her as affectionate, energetic, and full of warmth. Teachers at McIntosh Middle School, where she was a 6th grade student, remembered her as a child who greeted people with hugs and a bright smile. Her school principal once referred to her as a shining light. Carlie enjoyed singing in the school chorus, playing sports, spending time with her friends, and shopping at the mall. She loved her cat Charlie and admired pop star Jennifer Lopez. To those around her, Carlie was simply a happy child who loved life. On Saturday, January 31st, 2004, Carlie stayed overnight at a friend's house. The following day, she planned to return home in time to watch the Super Bowl with her family. At approximately 6:15 p.m., Carly began walking home, a distance of about 1 mile. Her route took her along Bee Ridge Road, a normally busy street, though traffic was lighter that evening due to the game. Concerned about Carly walking alone, her friend's mother called Susan Brucia to confirm that it was okay. Susan said she had not given permission for Carly to walk home by herself, especially along such a busy road. She immediately informed her husband, Stephen, who got into the car to pick Carly up. As Stephen drove along Bee Ridge Road, scanning sidewalks and intersections, he could not find her. He turned around and retraced the route again. Carly was nowhere in sight. As minutes passed, concern turned to panic. Despite the unusually quiet streets, Carly seemed to have disappeared without a trace. By 7:15 p.m., just 1 hour after Carly had left her friend's house, the family called 911, and Carly Brucia was reported missing.
911, what's the location of the emergency?
My daughter is missing.
What's your address, ma'am? And your phone number? Okay. Has she been missing before?
No, she had a fight with her girlfriend. She decided to walk home, and we've been driving around for about an hour and a half. And it's now an hour and a half walk. She's gone. We can't find her anywhere. I've called all her friends.
How old is she?
11.
And when was the last time that she was seen?
It was at 6 o'clock, Steve. Around 6 o'clock.
And she was at a friend's house?
Yeah.
Okay, what's her name, ma'am?
Carly, Carlie.
And last name?
Brucia, Brucia. She's just shy of 5 feet.
Okay. Do you know how much she weighs?
She's around 120 pounds.
Okay, what color hair does she have?
Dirty blonde.
And what color eyes?
Blue.
Deputies from the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office responded immediately. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, and spoke with neighbors and Carly's friends. They returned to the house where Carly had spent the night and attempted to reconstruct her movements. The search continued late into the night, but by 3 a.m., there was still no sign of Carly. By the next morning, more than 12 hours had passed since she was last seen. When Carly did not arrive at school, investigators escalated their efforts. Bloodhounds were brought in and given one of Carly's pillowcases to pick up her scent. The dogs traced her path along Bee Ridge Road. The trail ended suddenly behind a car wash located at 4715 Bee Ridge Road. This abrupt ending raised immediate concern. Detectives contacted the car wash owner, Mike Evanoff, who informed them that the property was equipped with motion-activated surveillance cameras. Investigators began reviewing the footage. 2 of the cameras showed nothing unusual. One captured only the main road. Another showed an empty parking lot. But the third camera, positioned behind the car wash, told a very different story. The timestamp read 6:21 p.m. on February 1st. The footage showed Carly walking alone behind the building. Seconds later, a man entered the frame. He appeared to be approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, with dark hair and visible tattoos on his arm. He was wearing a mechanic-style shirt with a name tag, though the name could not be clearly read. The man stopped Carly. They appeared to exchange a few words. Then he grabbed her arm and led her away, out of view of the camera. The entire encounter lasted only seconds. To investigators, the implications were unmistakable. Carly was in immediate and grave danger. Stephen Spinn was asked to come to the sheriff's office to answer questions. Based on phone records and corroborating information, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. However, Stephen shared an observation that caught investigators' attention. While driving up and down Bee Ridge Road searching for Carly, Stephen recalled seeing a red truck repeatedly traveling the same stretch of road. The truck had also been parked outside the home where Carly had stayed the night before. The man in the surveillance video appeared to be wearing a mechanic's uniform, similar to those worn by tow truck drivers. The owner of the red truck, a man named Ron, lived at the same residence where Carly had spent the night. He was brought in for questioning. Ron denied any involvement, His employer confirmed that he had been at work at the time of the abduction, and his time card supported his alibi. A search of his truck revealed nothing linking him to Carly. Ron was ruled out. Despite the chilling footage, investigators still did not know who the man was or where Carly had been taken. As detectives continued to examine the video frame by frame, they noticed something else. 3 minutes before Carly appeared on camera, a pale yellow 1992 Buick Century station wagon entered the car wash parking lot. The vehicle then exited, drove down Bee Ridge Road, slowed, and turned back toward the car wash. For investigators, this was a critical development. As the search intensified, the Sarasota community rallied. Volunteers searched fields, neighborhoods, and wooded areas. Missing posters bearing Carly's smiling face appeared on telephone poles and storefronts. The mayor referred to Carly as Sarasota's child, emphasizing that the entire city was invested in bringing her home. At a press conference, Susan Brucia addressed the public directly, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I love you, Carly," she said. "Please help me bring my daughter home." 2 days after Carly's abduction, as the surveillance footage was broadcast across local news stations, a woman watching from her home felt a sudden, unsettling recognition. She believed she knew the man in the video, and she decided to call police. The phone call came 2 days after Carly Brucia disappeared. A woman watching the evening news had seen the surveillance footage from the car wash and felt an immediate sense of recognition. She called her husband into the room and played the clip again. Both of them agreed they knew the man. He was a former business associate, someone they had worked with closely in the past. The woman contacted law enforcement and provided a name: Joseph Peter Smith. Detectives from the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, along with FBI agents, moved quickly. Smith was 37 years old, originally from Brooklyn, New York, and a father of 3. He had an extensive criminal record dating back to the early 1990s, including multiple arrests for drug-related offenses. At the time of Carly's disappearance, Smith was on probation and unemployed. When officers arrived at the address provided, neighbors confirmed someone was home. After waiting and receiving no response, investigators learned that Smith was under active supervision by a probation officer. After coordinating with her, Smith was asked to come outside. Standing before the officers, Smith appeared calm. He denied being at the car wash on the evening Carly disappeared. When shown a still image from the surveillance footage, he acknowledged that it resembled him, but insisted it was not him. He allowed officers to examine his tattoos and agreed to searches of both his vehicle and the room he was renting. Inside his room, detectives found a mechanic-style uniform with a name tag on the front. While nothing directly linked the clothing to Carly, it closely matched what the suspect in the video was wearing. During a search of Smith's brown Lincoln, officers found drug paraphernalia, which resulted in his arrest for violating the terms of his probation. At that point, investigators still lacked definitive proof tying Smith to Carly's abduction. As the search continued, detectives learned that a yellow Buick Century station wagon, matching the vehicle seen near the car wash, belonged to Naomi, one of the homeowners where Smith rented a room. Naomi initially told police that Smith had been on the phone with his estranged wife around the time of the abduction, seemingly providing him with an alibi. However, hours later, Naomi's husband Jeff came forward with a different account. Jeff explained that on the evening Carly disappeared, Smith had asked to borrow the Buick for a short time. When Jeff woke the following morning, Smith was gone, and when he returned later, he appeared unusually clean and upbeat. Jeff also noticed that the back seat of the vehicle had been folded down and that items inside had been disturbed. Sensing that something was wrong, Jeff voluntarily turned the vehicle over to law enforcement for forensic testing. With this new information, Smith's alibi collapsed. Smith was read his Miranda rights, and he requested an attorney. Investigators now believed they were closing in, but they still did not know where Carly was. On the evening of February 4th, 2004, Smith's brother, John Smith, arrived at the sheriff's office and spoke with FBI agents. John stated that he and Joseph were not close, but on the night of Carly's disappearance, Joseph had called him around 8 p.m. later, When John saw the surveillance footage on television, he immediately recognized his brother. His girlfriend noticed it as well, particularly the way the man in the video walked. Joseph's gait had changed following back surgery. John recalled that later that same night Joseph appeared at his home, acting strangely. He was wearing his mechanic's uniform but had on boots instead of his usual shoes. Joseph did not explain why he was there, and John refused to let him inside. The following day, Joseph reportedly behaved erratically at work, washing his hands repeatedly and telling his employer that he might need to leave the state at any time. John told investigators that if his brother was responsible, he would never voluntarily confess. Despite mounting circumstantial evidence, investigators still needed information that would lead them to Carly. On February 5th, Joseph was allowed to speak privately with his mother and brother at the police station. Afterward, John told officers that Joseph had not said anything of significance. No surveillance was placed on the family. Later that night, John contacted the FBI again, sounding confused. He believed his phone was being monitored. Investigators realized that Joseph must have told his brother something, leading John to think authorities already knew. FBI agents immediately went to John's home. There, the truth finally emerged. John provided directions to a location near 6221 Proctor Road, close to Interstate 75, behind the Central Church of Christ. In the early hours of February 6, 2004, law enforcement officers searched the area. In thick brush behind the church, they discovered Carly Brucia's body. The discovery ended all remaining hope. An autopsy later confirmed that Carly had been taken to a secluded area, restrained, and killed. Forensic evidence linked Joseph Smith directly to the crime. His DNA was found on Carly's clothing, and fibers from her red shirt, along with strands of her hair, were recovered from the yellow Buick. Investigators determined that Smith had disposed of Carly's clothing and backpack in separate locations in an attempt to avoid detection. Sheriff Bill Balkwill personally went to Carly's home to inform her family. Susan Brucia's grief was immediate and overwhelming. Shortly afterward, the sheriff addressed the public, announcing that Carly's body had been found and that Joseph Peter Smith was under arrest for her abduction and murder. The community of Sarasota was devastated. Memorials appeared near Carly's home and, at the church where she was found. McIntosh Middle School opened its doors to students and families, offering grief counseling. Parents across the city were fearful, reluctant to allow their children to walk alone even short distances. On February 20, 2004, Joseph Smith was formally charged with kidnapping, sexual battery, and first-degree murder. Because the crimes occurred in Florida, prosecutors sought the death penalty. At trial, the evidence against Smith was extensive: the surveillance footage, forensic findings from the Buick, DNA results, witness testimony, and Smith's own statements to family members. The jury found him guilty, and in December 2005, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. In the years that followed, Smith filed multiple appeals. Changes in Florida's death penalty laws led to repeated legal delays and resentencing hearings, prolonging the case and reopening wounds for Carly's family. Carly's father, Joseph Brucia, became increasingly vocal, criticizing the justice system for allowing Smith, who had violated probation prior to the crime, to remain free. In response to Carly's death, her father advocated for changes in the law aimed at stricter supervision of repeat offenders. Proposed legislation, often referred to as Carly's Law, sought to prevent similar tragedies by addressing gaps in parole and probation enforcement. While the law did not ultimately pass, Carly's case continued to influence national conversations about criminal justice and child safety. In July 2021, before any final resolution could be reached, Joseph Peter Smith died in prison at the age of 55 from natural causes. His death ended all remaining legal proceedings. For Carly's family, the news brought mixed emotions: relief that the process was finally over, and pain that full accountability would never be realized. Years later, the Garden Memorial behind the Central Church of Christ still stands as a place of remembrance. Volunteers continue efforts to maintain it, ensuring Carly is not forgotten. Carly Bruscia was only 11 years old. She had a family who loved her, friends who missed her, and a future that was taken from her far too soon. Her case remains a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked criminal behavior and the importance of vigilance, accountability, and community responsibility. As her father once said, Carly is never far from their thoughts. Her memory lives on, not only in the hearts of those who knew her, but in the lessons her story continues to teach.